Hi there, welcome to Cosmic Coaching with Daniel. I want to talk to you about the nature of time and space and time travel paradoxes and dimensions. So we often think of time as a fourth dimension. There's the three dimensions of space, which feel very tangible to us because we interact spatially with objects and things in space, whereas time seems a little bit more ephemeral. So we sort of say, well, that's a fourth dimension in addition to the three dimensions of space. But there are some people who have theorized that actually the primary dimension is time and not space. So time is not just an additional dimension that's psychological that we add onto three dimensions of space, but rather time is the overarching dimensions, and our space-time experiences derives from our experience of time. So if you can think of time as the primary dimension out of which falls the spatial dimension, then it gets a little bit strange to understand. In other words, you can think of time as orchestrating our experience in space rather than the reverse, that we just kind of move through space and have some kind of experience of time. But as I mentioned in an earlier video, time is a function of consciousness, so it's very subjective depending on our state of mind. In fact, some people claim to be able to kind of freeze time or freeze a moment in time. It's something that appears to be not variable, it appears to be linear and sequential based on our understandings of time and clocks, but upon further inspection we know that with relativity alone time is variable and light is considered a fixed quantity, and so that if you go fast enough you start to see that time is indeed variable and not absolute. And so our experience around time, our consciousness has something to do with that. But if we talk about time travel and going back in time or going forward in time, then it becomes very difficult to understand if time is something that flows from one point to another in a linear sequence. But if we start to understand that it's the primary dimension, it either acts like a spiral that links the future and the past together in the present, our experience of the present, then it's very interesting because it's the primary dimension out of which flows our other experiences in the space-time continuum. And one scientist that I heard talk about this, who's had some mystical experiences, talked about that everything happens simultaneously. We just have to experience it sequentially, one part at a time. So if you think about a picket fence and there's a hole in the fence and there's maybe a foot hole in the fence where you can see animals walking by. And if you were to see an animal walking by like a dog or a cat, first you'd see the head and then the neck and then the body and then the tail. You'd see one at a time, but you wouldn't from that conclude that that thing exists in time sequentially. Rather, it exists simultaneously as one object. You're just seeing it move through the slot in the fence sort of gradually, one body part at a time. So by the same token, this scientist, physicist, is suggesting that we experience slices of time, but actually everything is happening at the same time. We just can't experience it that way because of the nature and limitations of our consciousness. We have to play things out in space that has an apparent temporal dimension that takes time. Okay? And so it's mind-boggling that this could be the case. But if you look at something that's been discovered, and that is the Bible code, the Bible code suggests that something like that is going on, because apparently a mathematician discovered that these codes embedded under the letters of the Bible, I believe it was the Old Testament, and essentially those codes are enacting all events that have ever happened over the past 2,000 years, and even predicting future events. So it's kind of linked in there in codes, mathematical codes that have to do with spacing between letters, and the names of presidents are there, and leaders and famous people who've been assassinated, inventions, every conceivable person and place and thing, including things that have happened, were predicted in the Bible code that's embedded underneath the letters in some sort of mathematical code. So if you haven't heard about that, I believe Jeffrey Satinover wrote a book about it. There's been several books written about it, but there's actually computer programs now that you can punch in names and things and see. And so there are all sorts of things playing out But this Bible code suggests that everything has already happened. Everything that will happen or has happened has already happened in some kind of simultaneity of experience, and that's why all this can be predicted. But there's also even alternate timelines and possibilities built in this Bible code. So to give you a concrete example, one of the Israeli prime ministers was assassinated, and he was warned about it ahead of time because it was in the Bible code. His name and the date and the location was all there together in a location in this Bible code around his name, and in fact turned out to be true. It correctly predicted that he would be assassinated, even the name of his assassin. How could this possibly be known, much less built in to the Bible? And the odds of this happening by sort of randomly or by accident, they've done the mathematics on it. It's improbable that all these pieces of information can be embedded there by accident. It's off the charts in terms of probability. So it's been mathematically verified that these things could not be by accident. These codes are in there with actual names, places, names of gurus, mystics, leaders, people who have been assassinated, things that have yet to happen, things that have already happened. That suggests this idea from this physicist that all time happens simultaneously. We just cannot but play it out in a linear sequence in space, means that there's something very odd going on. If we could master that, then things like spontaneous miracles and spontaneous healings and quick manifestations would be possible, because we would have mastered the overarching dimension of time, which again, remember from an earlier video, relates very much to consciousness. So if we can master our consciousness, we may be able to tap into this idea of time being the primary dimension and space is secondary. So I'll give you one more cool example and then I'll end it there. There was a guy that's kind of, you might call him a channeler, and he brought through information in his live channels. And one thing that he was curious about, is it possible to freeze time? And so he explored that, and at one point it actually happened. And the way he describes it is he was sitting in a chair with some people having a conversation, and at one point everything just froze around him. Essentially that point in time was frozen where everybody was not moving. He got up, walked around, sat somewhere else, and then time continued to flow. And from their perspective, it's like he suddenly switched positions, instantaneously. But for his point of view, time had frozen, and he was able to get up and walk around. From his perspective, everyone else was frozen in that moment in time where he was allowed to walk through time. That was a person that I knew, had talked to various times, and he was quite sophisticated and masterful in various things. And so the fact that he just explored the possibility of freezing time, he was able to experience it. And one further example, but this is from a sci-fi show that you may well know. It's Star Trek Next Generation. It was in one of the movies, actually. There was these advanced race of beings that were thousands of years old, or at least several hundred years old. And some of the youngest ones are 700, 800, 900 years old. They appeared very young, but they could master things like time and devices and inventions. And so in one moment, when Jean-Luc Picard is talking to this lady and saying, well, how do you experience time like this? How do you manipulate time? And she said, well, it's no problem. We can freeze a moment in time. You just do this. And she did it with him. She basically froze that moment. You can see the butterfly wings flapping in slow motion to illustrate that that moment was frozen. So that's how they depicted it, but these beings were more advanced in many cognitive capacities. So again, an illustration that your consciousness and your levels of mastery of consciousness will allow you to do things with time that are not available to regular everyday humans like us. So just some food for thought. Hope you enjoyed that. I enjoy coaching people on many, many topics around brain health, accelerated learning. I do empathic mirror counseling, holistic coaching, public speaking, all sorts of topics. You can check it out at my counseling page. Just click on the link below, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video, and have a great day.